Imagine you're 18. You've just done the hardest thing an Indian teenager can do. You beat 2 million other kids. You got into the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, the #1 research institute in the country. Your parents are crying. The whole colony knows the hard part is over. Except it isn't. Because the letter says, congratulations, now comes with a second letter, a bill. At IISc, the undergraduate fee sat at 10,000 rupees a year, unchanged for 14 years, from 2011 all the way up to 2025. And then in February 2026, in a single notice, it became 80,000 rupees a year, 8 times higher, overnight, at a government institute. And within days, the students were on the street demanding a rollback, warning it would close the doors of the country's top science institute to poor and middle class families. Now, here is what makes this as a case study, not just a news story. IISc is not just an exception, it's a pattern. Across almost every central government institution in India, the IITs, IIMs, IISERs, NID, NIFT and the law schools, the same thing has happened over the last decade. And it did not happen by accident, it happened by policy. So today, let's follow the money. What did these places cost a decade ago? What do they cost now? And who exactly decided that public education should come with a private price tag? To understand why the hike matters, you have to understand what these institutions were. The whole idea of a public IIT, a public IISc was radical and simple. Talent should decide who studies, not money. A brilliant kid from a village in Bihar and a rich kid from the South Delhi would pay roughly the same nominal fee because the state, not the student, funded the institution. That was the deal, that was the point. And for decades it held. A degree from India's top public institutions cost a few thousand rupees, not because these places were cheap to run. An IIT seat cost the exchequer several lakhs a year to provide, but because the government absorbed the cost. It treated educating its own people as an investment, not a transaction. The student paid a token amount, the nation paid the rest and collected the return later in the form of the doctors and scientists and engineers that the token seat produced. This is not some uniquely Indian idealism, by the way. It's how Germany runs its universities today. Near free, state funded, on the logic that an educated population is national infrastructure like roads. India used to believe the same thing about its best institutions. Hold that thought, because what you're about to watch is a country walking away from the belief one fee notice at a time. Keep that word in mind, investment, because the entire story of the last decade is the story of that word being quietly swapped from another one, cost recovery. The idea that the student should pay back what their education cost. And once you make that swap, everything else follows. Let's just look at the numbers institution by institution. Start with the IITs. In 2016, BTech tuition was raised from 90,000 rupees a year to 2 lakh, a jump of 122% in one single move. And the IIT Council had actually asked for 3 lakh. Then the postgraduate students got hit even harder. MTech fee went from around 20,000 rupees to 2 lakhs, a nearly 10-fold increase. The IIMs, here is a number you can't argue with because it comes from the government's own reply in the parliament. The flagship MBA at IIM Ahmedabad went from 4 lakh rupees in 2007 to 27 lakhs, a jump of around 575%. Today it's 27.5 lakh for 2 years, the price of a small apartment. The science institutes, the ones who are supposed to be betting our future on. IISc we have seen 8 times. At the IISER, the dual degree tuition that was around 8,000 rupees a semester for the 2013 batch is now roughly 4.5 times. And the scholarship most of these science students relied on, the Inspire scholarship, 80,000 rupees a year, was the first to cut over barely half of them. And then as of 2026, quietly stopped being announced at all. So the fee goes up and their support that offset it goes down at the same time. And it's not just the science and management elite. At the National Institute of Design, a government institute of national importance, a Bachelor of Design now costs around 18 to 19 lakh rupees, and NID offers no scholarship of its own. At NIFT, the Fashion Institute, the 4-year degree climbed from around 7 lakhs to over 13 lakhs, and in 2020, 11,000 students across 16 campuses boycotted classes over it, one of them saying his family had to switch over to a lower quality of rice. At the Film Institute in Pune, a proposal raised the acting course from 48,000 rupees a year to 3,41,000, a 600% jump. At the National Law Universities, fees hit 2 to 3 lakhs a year, while an ordinary static law college nearby charged 10,000. And in the central universities, it turned into protest after protest. BHU raised an MSc agricultural fee by 430%. At Allahabad University, fee rose nearly 300%, and the desperation there ran so deep it made national news. At University of Hyderabad, a single exam fee jumped by 567%, and at JNU, a university where more than 40% students come families earning under 12,000 rupees a month, the administration in 2019 invented a brand new service charge of 1,700 rupees a month on top of hostel rent that jumped from 10 rupees to 600. When students protested and won a partial rollback, a former union leader summed it up: 95% of the fee hike remains. Now, in fairness, and this matters because I want you to trust the pattern, not just the outrage, it wasn't universal. The School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi barely moved its fee over the same years. So this isn't a law of physics. Some institution held the line, which makes the ones that didn't a choice, not an inevitability. So that's the what. One decade, nearly every public institution fees raising anywhere from double to 8 times over. The obvious question is why? And this is where most people stop at the lazy answer: inflation. Costs went up. No, inflation doesn't take a fee from 10,000 to 80,000. A decision does. So let's find the decision. Here is the single most important thing to understand in this entire video. Watch very closely. For decades, when a public university needed a new building or a lab, the government gave it a grant. Free money because it's public good. Then in 2017 that changed. The government created something called HEFA, the Higher Education Financing Agency, and here is the trick. HEFA is 91% owned by a bank, Canara Bank, and only 9% by Ministry of Education. So now when a university needs the building, it doesn't get a grant, it gets a loan because a bank owns HEFA. And a loan has to be repaid. So where does a public university find the money to repay a bank? It has essentially one source that it fully controls: the students. The government's own commissioned review done by NIPFP found that the student fees make up about 78% of these institutions' internal revenue. That's the money repaying the loan. Let me make the math concrete because this is the whole game. IIT Bombay took a HEFA loan of around 520 crore rupees. IIT Delhi close to 600 crore. JNU 445 crores. Delhi University applied for nearly 1,000 crores. These are in small numbers, and the interest clock starts ticking the moment the money lands. The government covers the interest, but the principal, the bulk of it, the institution has to find on its own, and the only lever it has to pull is the fee. So a building gets built with the bank loan, but a first-year student 15 years later is still quietly paying it off in her tuition. She never took the loan, she just inherited it. Now, I could be accused of connecting dots that aren't there. So let me not do that. Let me quote the same government review directly. It found that Ministry of Education has asked them to raise the fee. That's not an activist saying it. That's not me saying it. That's a finding of a review the government itself paid for. The instruction went out: raise fee, cut cost. And the pressure is brutal. 14 institutions spend more than half their revenue just repaying these loans. NIT Goa spends over 90%. Think about that. 90 paisa of every rupee it earns going to a bank. And here is the part that turns this from negligence into something colder. Having pushed institutions onto loans, the government then cut HEFA's own budget by 99.9% from 2,200 crore rupees to 1 crore in 2021. And the old capital grants shrank too, from 6 to 8,000 crore a year down to under 5,000. So the grants dried up, the loan tape barely opened, and the gap in the middle, that gap is your fee hike. But HEFA is just the engine. Around it, the government built a whole gearbox of politics, every one of them wrapped in a word that sounds wonderful: autonomy. In 2018, UGC's granted autonomy rules told the universities they could launch new courses, but only in self-financing mode. Fund it yourself. In 2017, the IIM Act gave the IIMs the freedom to set their own fees, and then in 2023, the government halved their grants. The Institutions of Eminence scheme gave institutions the freedom to change foreign students without restriction, but delivered only about a third of the money it promised. Delhi University got 9% of what it was promised. You see the pattern in every single one. The freedom to charge more arrives in the full. The funding arrives cut in half or not at all. That's not autonomy. As a teacher's body put it, HEFA loan-based funding without grants is not autonomy. It is enforced commercialization. And the direction it all points is unmistakable. In 2023, the government opened the door for foreign universities to set up Indian campuses. Free to charge whatever fees they like and free to send their profits home. Read that next to everything else and the philosophy snaps into focus. public institutions squeezed until they priced like private ones, and the private players got invited into charge openly. The word public stays on the gate, the economics behind it quietly become private. And in 2025, the government's own think tank, Niti Aayog, recommended extending this exact model, fee autonomy, a HEFA-style loan agency, more self-finance courses to the state universities that teach 80% of India's students. So this isn't winding down, it's scaling up. Now, whenever you raise this, someone says, so what? These are elite institutions. If you can crack the IIT exam, you can afford it. And anyway, there are fee waivers for the poor. Let's take that seriously because it's the crux. Yes, there are fee waivers. At the IITs and IISc, the fee is fully waived for SC and ST disabled students and for families earning under 1 lakh a year. That's real and it matters. So the very poorest are on paper protected. But watch who falls through is the family earning 1.5 to 3 lakhs a year. Too rich for the full waiver, nowhere near rich enough to casually absorb a 2 lakh or 18 lakh bill. That's not the elite, that's the exact middle class these institutions were built to live. They don't get a waiver, they get a loan. Do the math on that family. Say they earn 2.5 lakhs a year. That's a little over 20,000 rupees a month for the whole household. An IIT BTech in all course runs 2.5 to 3 lakhs a year. That is more than their entire annual income for one child for 1 year, 4 years running. So the waiver that's supposed to make it fair stops exactly where the need is more brutal, and the 18-year-old signs an education loan before she ever managed a rupee, betting her 20s on a job market that may or may not be there. And the loans that used to soften the blow are being pulled. The post-matric scholarship for SC, ST and OBC students has had its income ceiling frozen since 2013. The Maulana Azad Fellowship, which funded nearly 7,000 minority research scholars, was scrapped. The Inspire Science Fellowship, as we said, is quietly disappearing. So the fee goes up and the ladder that helped you reach it gets shorter at the same time. And then there is the quietest cruelty of all. Even the seats reserved for the marginalized are going unfilled. IIT Delhi denied 132 PhD seats to reserved category candidates in a single year. IIT Bombay denied 80 while adding 95 general category seats. Over 80% of IIT and IIM faculty comes from general category despite the law. So put it together, the fee is higher, the waiver misses the middle, the scholarships are shrinking, the reserved seats are empty. Each of those on its own is a policy footnote. Together they are a door quietly, politely closing on exactly the people public education was invented to let in. Let me now argue against myself honestly, because a case study that only hears one side isn't worth making. Spending is at an all-time high. True, in raw rupees, the education budget has never been bigger. But that's a magician's trick. Measured against the size of the economy, India still spends about 2.7% of the GDP on education, below where it was a decade ago and less than half 6% every government since 1968 has promised. Raw rupees go up every year, that tells you nothing. These institutions need money and the government can't find everything. Also fair, good education is expensive and no budget is infinite. But notice, this is an argument about scarcity, and scarcity is a choice about priorities. The same decade that told IISc to charge students 8 times more found the money to triple the budget of elite model schools. The question was never whether the money exists, it's who the bill gets handed to. Autonomy makes institutions world class, maybe. Genuine academic freedom is real good, but autonomy that comes with a funding cut isn't freedom, it's abandonment with a nicer name. When the government's own review shows it instructed institutions to raise funds, autonomy is doing a lot of dishonest work. Loans gets repaid, it financially sound. Repaid by whom? That's the whole point. A model where the NIT Goa spends 90% of its income servicing debt isn't sound. It's a public institution turned into a debt collecting agency, and the debtor is an 18-year-old. So the strongest version of the government's case still collapses on one fact it can't wave away. Its own review recorded the order to raise the fee. Everything else is framing. Here is the case study lesson, and it's bigger than any one institute. There are 2 ways a country can see education. As an investment, something that state pays for because an educated citizen pays the country back 100 times over in doctors and engineers and teachers and taxes, or as a cost, a service that users should pay for, price recovered, balanced on a spreadsheet. For most independent India's history, the official answer was investment. Over the last decade, quietly, not in a dramatic speech, but in loan agreements and gazette notifications and budget footnotes no one reads, the answer has changed to cost. And the thing about the swap is that it's invisible until it lands on you, until you are the 18-year-old who did everything right, cracked the exam, earned the seat, and discovers that the seat now comes with a price your family can't pay, until the fee that was 1,000 rupees for 14 years becomes 80,000, and the country's best science institute becomes, in the word of its own protesting students, a place for those who can afford it. Because a public institution that only the private can afford isn't a public institution anymore. It's just a private one with a government logo. If you like this case study, do follow for more Unlearn with Ajmal.